Elizabeth, or I had to call with Elizabeth,
Right.
and went through where we stood, and she said, please come back to us with an estimate.
Yeah.
And, you know, for us
So
to be able to wrap this
welcome you to this very critical and important webinar on understanding early childhood development in humanitarian contexts, especially given the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Shekwefe Azanji. I'm the Global ECD Technical Lead at the Early Childhood Development Action Network. And this webinar is being co-organized by the ECD Action Network, the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INEE, and the Moving Minds Alliance, or MMA. Before we begin today, I want to welcome everyone. We have over 1,000 people who've registered from over 100 countries, so this is a great feedback. There are just a few housekeeping things. If you would kindly in the chat introduce yourself, let us know what country you're from. Please do select all panelists and country and attendees so that everybody can be introduced to you. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of messages coming into just all panelists. If you do that, then only panelists will be able to receive your message. So please, everybody, just take a second right now and select all panelists and attendees in the chat so that when you're responding, everybody can see your message. Fantastic. All panelists and attendees. The next housekeeping piece is the webinar will be for 90 minutes. We will first have all the speakers present and then we'll have time for Q&A. But we encourage everyone to be sharing your questions. And if you have questions for the panelists, there is a Q&A box and we request that everyone insert questions in the Q&A box. The chat is pretty wild and it goes really fast, so we will miss your questions. So if you can kindly put any questions directed at panelists in the Q&A box, that would be great. So without further ado, I would first like to welcome the executive directors or the chairpersons for the individual networks. So welcome each of you. We'll begin with Elizabeth Lule, the executive director.
Thank you, Shekwefe. Warm greetings from the Early Childhood Development Action Network. We hope you and your loved ones are safe and staying healthy during these extraordinary times. ECDAN, or the ECD Action Network, is a global network of networks, and our partners include regional networks, UN partners, the World Bank, the Inter-American Bank, foundations, international NGOs, and other sectoral global partnerships and coalitions that we work with. Our vision is simple. It's a world where every young child is safe, healthy, well-nourished, happy, and learning. And we work through our partners to advocate for higher prioritization and investment in ECD. We facilitate knowledge exchange and learning. We connect and align across global and regional partners and across sectors to drive collective action at scale. We are delighted to be collaborating with INEE and co-hosting also with the Moving Minds Alliance. I think we have an exciting 90 minutes ahead of us. Good deliberations and welcome.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. With that, I now introduce Elvira Thiessen, who is the steering group chair for the Moving Mind Alliance from the Bernard Van Leer Foundation. Welcome, Elvira.
Thank you, Shekwefe, and thank you, Elizabeth, and a very good day to everybody. My name is Elvira. I'm very pleased to welcome everyone on behalf also of the Moving Minds Alliance, or MMA for short. MMA is a funder group and multi-stakeholder network of organizations focused on scaling up support for young children and families affected by crisis. So really the group we are focusing on today. For many of these families, the challenges COVID-19 has brought are unfortunately not so new. So it's wonderful to have this opportunity to share with you all and highlight some of the specific needs these families face now in a double emergency. For your information, there was a short statement that summarized some of these needs that Moving Minds Alliance and partners put together attached to the invite, so you might want to check back on that. But also I think it's a really good moment to showcase the power of human resilience that ultimately underpins all work in early childhood development. And I think we've been seeing this again now, both in children and caregivers directly affected when given adequate support, and also in those responding, again, in just very creative and effective ways. And I'm very pleased that we'll be hearing from some of these organizations today. So with that, again, many thanks to co-host ECDAN and INEE speakers and everybody on the line. Fantastic to see so much participation from all over the world.
Thank you so much, Elvira. Again, I just want to remind everyone, if you can select all panelists and attendees in the chat. I'm still seeing messages come into all panelists. And then without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dean Brooks, who is the director of INEE, to you, Dean.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
And if I may, panelists at the moment to turn off your.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm very excited about today's webinar. Fascinating to watch the chat as I see countries all around the world. It's really impressive. But yes, my name is Dean Brooks. I'm the director of the Interagency Network for Education and Emergencies. I'd like to start off by thanking all of our friends at Moving Minds Alliance, ECDAN, and all of you here on this webinar. For those of you who are not familiar, INEE is an open global network of over 16,000 members with the shared mission to ensure the right to a quality, safe, and relevant education for all who live in emergencies and crisis contexts through prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. INEE exists because of and for its members. So if you are not a member already, I would really like to encourage you to join INEE for free. There's no cost. You just need to visit our website and click the join button. And then there's a form for you to fill out. On the website, as well as general support for education and emergencies, you will also find dedicated resources, webinars, blogs, and so forth to support this COVID-19 response. And hopefully you can see the link in the chat box. We'll be sure to put that up for you. Here at INEE, we recognize that the period of early childhood, typically defined as the period of time between birth to ages 8, lays the foundation for future learning, behavior, health, and well-being. That is why we are so pleased to have a dedicated task team. And just on a personal note, I used to be a primary education teacher, so it's very important to me. And I miss teaching that age all the time. It's such an important milestone. But we do have a task team focused on ECD and very excited at the development we've seen in the last couple of months. And as you'll see on the call, we have Katie Murphy from IRC and Nada Ilatar from UNICEF who co-chair that task team. And they, of course, have been instrumental in putting together today's webinar. So thank you, Katie and Nada, for this. The focus of the task team is on the multi-sectoral inputs across health, nutrition, protection, education, WASH, and other key sectors that are required to promote healthy development for young children and families living in crisis and conflict settings. Too often, the holistic needs of young children are not addressed within the humanitarian response. And we know that this population is at high risk for poor outcomes that can follow them throughout their lives and impact the societies in which they live. And now we are seeing this global pandemic as a new crisis layered onto the existing crises. It compounds and exacerbates threats to healthy development in some of the world's most challenging settings. This is the focus of today's webinar. We've brought together a diverse sample of practitioners to share their approaches to adapting ECD programming in humanitarian settings. And we're going to hear insights on research and policy, and then at the end, open it up to question and answers. So time to get started. And I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker, Zarlasht Halamaizai, the director and co-founder of RTI. So I'd like to invite Zarlasht to go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dean, and hello to everyone from all around the world. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm really honored to take part. My name is Alash Talamzai. I co-founded and run an organization called Refugee Trauma Initiative, and we provide psychosocial support to people affected by the trauma associated with war and ongoing displacement. I wanted to start by just setting some context about what refugees are going through in Greece, and I wanted to do that with some messages from the refugees. This is from people that we've spoken to in recent weeks. We can go out once a day. There's no building around us. It's just plain. It's nothing. Camps are in far places, far from any human being. They're not close to Greek civilization, so it's painful. Sometimes I feel very hopeless and disappointed. It feels like we are on another planet, like we are not alive. I miss the seaside. I want to see a sunset again. These are unexplainable things. Grief is an experience I can never explain. Refugees suffer from poverty and hunger. Now he's facing another crisis in his life, which is a crisis in the world. Imagine how it will affect him and his body. The sense of fear is very high. Discrimination is running very high and makes it a more difficult situation. I wanted to start with these messages because they convey the anxiety, the pain, and the stress that the refugees are feeling much better than I can. They come from conversations that me and my colleagues have been having with families around Greece since COVID started. We invited people from the refugee community and frontline workers to take part in in-depth conversations so that we can create spaces where they are hard and so that we can try and shed light to the lived experience of people displaced in Greece and share stories behind the statistics. Even before the crisis started, the refugee population in Greece where we work was already really struggling to survive. The rise of the far-right rhetoric, which culminated in several attacks against refugees and aid workers, a hostile government policy and lack of basic services, including shelter, food, and early childhood care was really exasperating the situation and putting extreme pressure on the refugee population in Greece. Just weeks before the WHO declared COVID a pandemic, the situation in Evros exploded. Thousands of people were bused to the Turkish border, and they were stopped by the Greek border guard. We heard reports of refugees being shot as they tried to cross the border. And the Greek government responded by stopping any applications in Greece and denying people the right to seek asylum. COVID arrived in Greece in these circumstances. I recently spoke to a young Afghan man who's stuck in Moria. This is the notorious camp on Lesbos, which despite having the capacity for only 2,700 people, currently holds almost 18,000. He was feeling extreme anxiety as the camp has no provision to meet the basic needs of his family. He's 26, he arrived in Moria in autumn of last year with his wife and his toddler. And since then, his wife has developed mental health issues that are so severe that she has tried to harm their baby daughter. He's tried to seek psychiatric help, but there's none available. And he currently has to make a choice between looking after his daughter and keeping her safe or queuing for food, which can take between 2 and 4 hours. Our findings are summarized in a report that we published yesterday, and my colleague Gabriela will now share this in the chat box with you. So I welcome your interaction with this report. The way that we responded to COVID, all of our programs is based on building relationships and building community with the refugees. And so, you know, the COVID crisis really posed a challenge to us. We've responded by supporting local partners to continue to engage with the refugee families and their children. And we've supported frontline workers who were both reeling from having to deal with a pandemic for which they had no training, and also the attacks that they were facing. Our ECD facilitators have produced resources for families, children, and we've had an amazing response to these resources, particularly from children who love seeing their ECD facilitators on their screen. A portion of these resources were recorded by refugees themselves. So we have audio instructions in Arabic, Farsi, and Kurdish for ECD activities that parents can do with their children at home or in the camp, and these are usually without any materials. So I encourage you to have a look at these as well and see if they might be helpful in your context. Gabriella will be sharing the link now. I wanted to finish with 2 practical points that we as a community practitioners and organizations working for the youngest refugees could focus on. First, the pandemic has highlighted the importance of internet connectivity for refugees, both in terms of disseminating up-to-date information about COVID and allowing access to educational and psychosocial resources online, which might be helpful in getting through periods of lockdown, which I'm told will happen again. And I think this is also really important to keep families connected to each other, as this alleviates their isolation and loneliness. Second, I think lockdown without connectivity creates black holes of information. So people are stuck in the camps and there's very little information about how they're being treated. So this is really important to holding authorities that are responsible for refugees to account. Finally, as an Afghan and as a former refugee myself, I felt incredibly connected to the protests that are demanding respect for life and dignity of people of color and an end to racism that threatens their lives. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that refugees suffer some of the most violent racism around the world. And even in Europe, where we operate, their human rights are routinely violated. They're beaten, excluded, and banished to the peripheries of society. This kind of treatment creates a legacy of trauma and pain, which you can see on the faces of protesters and will be felt for generations. So I would hugely welcome a consortia effort from this community to both highlight the reality of racism towards refugees and hold those that have a duty of care, particularly to the youngest of children, accountable. Thank you. I think I kept to time.
Hi there, thank you so much for a really powerful, moving presentation. Dean has lost connection for a moment. He's joining us from Honduras. So just let me step in, Charlotte from INEE here, and to hand over to our next speaker, over to Gabriel, starring the co-founder and chief of vision and strategy for IACT. I'm really looking forward to the presentation. Thank you, Gabriel, over to you.
Thank you, and what a wonderful presentation to follow by Sarah Lash. I just loved her telling the story of the refugees and hearing their voices, which is very much what IACT is about. And we've all been in dozens of Zooms since this pandemic started. I'm still intimidated by the technology, but here it goes. I'm going to try and share the screen. So we are IACT, and I'm going to breeze through information. Katie J, our executive director, is on the chat, and she can give you more context. We work to provide humanitarian action to aid, empower, and extend hope to those affected by mass atrocities. These are some of the places where we work, and we are based in the United States, and it's one of the difficult places to work in nowadays, as Sarah Lash mentioned what is happening here. And we also see, from our work, we see where extreme prejudice and hatred can take things. So it's surreal to see the conditions that exist here in our own country. But we work in other difficult places also. And we like to go to places that are forgotten mostly and hard to reach. We are in Greece also with refugees from all over the world. We are in Chad, where our biggest impact has been, and with refugees from Darfur, in Cameroon, refugees from Central African Republic, Tanzania, refugees from Burundi, and we've implemented in Central African Republic itself with displaced populations there. Our early childhood education program is Little Ripples. For us, more important than the what or the where is the how we implement this program. It is co-created with the refugee community. It is refugee-led. It is culturally relevant, and it's steeped in mindfulness. When we were confronted with this pandemic, we just went to these very same principles in responding to it. From very early on, we started to communicate with the populations in all these different settings that are very much isolated. And most of the groups that we work with, they don't have access to internet. It was all through WhatsApp. But we started with listening. We sent out quite immediately before anything was really happening in any of these settings as far as a response to COVID-19. We started to do some quick assessment with our populations through WhatsApp. WhatsApp has been our main means of communication and virtually our only means of communication with all the refugee leaders in all these different settings. And it was quite immediately, and so in a matter of days, we had information about what their needs were, what was missing, and there was a lot missing. That they weren't getting any information, that they were scared. They wanted to respond and protect their communities. So so that was the first step. We immediately started creating documents that gave them the basic information about how to protect their communities. A lot of myth-busting information, that they were getting so much wrong information, which is worse than no information at all. So we created documents, some for the leaders themselves, so for our refugee teachers, for cooks, for education coordinators. And so far we've created 8 different documents and translated into 13 different languages. Another need was soap. So we immediately started fundraising for soap and turned it into, again, within days, our teachers and our staff there on the ground started distributing soap. You know, we were sending out the information that people need to wash their hands regularly, and they're saying we don't have even soap or the materials for us to be washing ourselves. So that became immediate. And then over to the education part. I think many of us here on this panel and people that have joined wouldn't want to admit it, but early childhood education is quite simple. For us, if the kids are safe, if the kids are having fun, then learning will happen. So that has to be the priority right now. During this crisis, within a crisis, we cannot get complicated. We cannot get into heavy M&E and trying to overthink it. Let's just support our communities to be able to do the basics that are needed, and especially in home settings. So that's our next step. The response just has to be immediate, and we have to take the lead from the refugee community themselves. I'll share this message from our main refugee coordinator in Chad, and he's a Darfuri refugee. And Umda, he experienced the worst of the violence. He, at the height of the genocide in Darfur, lost 45 family members in the course of 1 week, and then helped 7,500 people escape over into Chad. He is the most positive, most resourceful person you'll ever meet. And what he asked for is support from the world, and allow them to be the leaders in responding to this crisis. It's so important for us to use this opportunity of this crisis within a crisis to reassess how we implement early childhood, but then also all humanitarian programs. There is no reason for us to be going to these camps and from the minute refugees wake up, be telling them what to do, how to do it, when to do it, when they are the experts in their own community. They are the experts, I mean, sadly, they are the experts in crisis. Every single day is a crisis for them. So for early childhood, it's not any different. And again, during a pandemic, it's even more important to let them lead. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Really appreciate hearing from you. I'd like to now turn to Iram Marim, the Executive Director of BRAC. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm Iram from BRAC, and I'm representing BRAC as well as I'm representing Play to Learn. I'd really like to thank the organizers INEE, ECDAN, and Moving Minds Alliance. This is a great opportunity to share our work. So I start, Pashe Achi in Bengali is beside you, and this is a telecommunication model that we've been implementing in the Rohingya refugee camp in Bangladesh. And the lockdown in Bangladesh started in March, and we've sort of just piloting and testing in April with the implementation in May. So it's very, very recent. The next slide, please. So Pashe Achi, beside you, it has meaning at many, many levels. And what it is actually it's a 20-minute teleconversation that is held between the frontliner and a caregiver and a child every week for 20 minutes. And in this 20 minutes, it's about 10 minutes is well-being, and there's 10 minutes of playful approaches for learning. And then we also focus entirely on the 0 to 6. So you can imagine, there's a slight messaging difference between the 0 to 2 and the 2 to 6. And the purpose of this is really to have to respect the children, to respect caregivers, and also to respect the frontliners so that they feel respected through this intervention. And through this intervention, what we also do is we enhance the skills of the caregiver to be able to engage with the children through play for their learning. Next slide, please. So it's, the front liner that you see, a woman. This is typically the kind of frontliners that we develop their capacities. And, the whole content for this Pashe Achi is integrated between well-being and between learning through play approaches. But, I just have to share that, we were testing a hotline, a helpline in April, and that the curriculum of the helpline was based on telecounseling, and that's the call anatomy for empathetic listening that we honed on for this. And so we integrated that with the learning through play that we've been doing for 5 years. And, the whole training is based on a cascade. And, for the messaging, now we are also co-creating with Sesame Workshop, and we're very, very excited about that. And it's really, this whole, model is about a skillful combination of content, messaging content with communication strategies as well as technology. And the frontliners and the children and the mothers, they're all from the community. So we do develop the capacities of individual communities. Next slide, please. And so, you might want to know what has happened in this few weeks. So what we see is, this is really a platform for learning and to be able to engage children. And this is the only way that we can engage, because, in this whole lockdown, there is no way that you can reach the children and the families. So this telecommunication modality is, the only way to reach the children. Then, also what we've done is, the content, we've taken the humanitarian play lab content, we've taken the kabya, we've taken the rhymes, we've taken the, physical play that we've collected over many months. We've taken that and we're trying to really share that with the children as well as share that with the mothers so that they can engage with the children through mobile to mobile. And this is also a safe space for the caregiver because, when we talk, we have a teleconversation, we also ask the caregiver about how she's feeling. And much of it is also about how she heals. And this is a dimension of also gender because, traditionally in the Rohingya camp, the mobile phone is with the father, with the men. But through this intervention, is the women who are the frontliners, they use it for work, as well as, it's the caregivers, the mothers, they're also using it for programming. So there's a very exciting gender dimension in this. Next slide, please. So, one of the things is we think that it is also very, very important that we look at some measures in order to measure the quality framework, whether, how the structure is, how the processes are. So that's something that we are just starting to do in discussion. But also very important is the lessons learned. And in this lessons learned, we find that, children are very excited to receive the phone calls from the frontliners. The mothers feel valued. Our own frontliners feel very dedicated and passionate about it. We do leverage on the relationship of the frontliners. And, it is possible to reach about 80% of children. And that's, that's also something that we are very excited about. And, like I said, women do remain as the drivers of change. But what we've also seen is that, in this whole ecosystem, where we are focusing on the diet of the mothers and the children, it is also very important that we include the fathers. So the extension of this Pashyati is that now we are really trying to also include the fathers through mobile to mobile. And I'd really like to say also that, this whole ecosystem of early childhood where we have the mothers and the children and the fathers, this whole ecosystem, this definitely also should be the center stage for our advocacy for crisis. ECD must remain at the center stage for our advocacy. And we have shared the model also with the ECD working group in the humanitarian sector in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar. And lastly, what I like to say with the last slide is that, this kind of intervention has promise. And so once we resume to a new normal, we think the humanitarian play lab, with the humanitarian play lab, we should complement with Pashyati. So I'll end here. Again, thank you to the organizers and to our partners in Play to Learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ira. I'd like to turn now to Ayman Taha from the International Rescue Committee. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dean. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all well and safe. My name is Ayman from IRC. And I work with on the Ahlan Simsim program. Ahlan Simsim is a joint ECD intervention created by Sesame Workshop and IRC, designed to serve young children and families affected by conflict and displacement. Ahlan Simsim is a program that aims to transfer humanitarian response, refocusing a need to place an emphasis on early childhood at the center of any response. The desired impact of the program is a new generation of children grow to be productive, healthy, kind adults, and communities and societies have greater social cohesion and are more peaceful. Slide. Due to the limitation of time, I won't be able to talk about the direct services program we are implementing in details. So I will dive into the adopting Ahlan Simsim program during the COVID-19 crisis. Happy to provide any more details or information about the program to whoever is interested after the webinar. As you all know, due to COVID-19, all schools and educational activities and services, including ECD services in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, like other countries around the world, were suspended. However, unlike many countries where governments, in one way or another, rolled out some forms of learning, countries affected by conflict, like Syria and Iraq, and with massive refugee population like Jordan and Lebanon, we're dealing with two crises: lack of access to quality and health services, and lack of access to educational services for children. The Ahlan Simsim team adopted engagement modalities and content to continue reaching caregivers and children during COVID-19. The team started with adapting and creating awareness messages that addresses COVID-19 prevention, caregiver and child well-being, and ECD messages. The field team then communicated these messages and activities to caregivers via WhatsApp, voice notes, to guide and help caregivers through simple activities to engage their children at home. We're also working very closely with our local NGO partners and IRC sectors like health and protection to maximize our outreach through social media platform content delivery and integration of ECD messages into their existing response. Slide. The education framework for our COVID-19 responses within 4 areas: COVID knowledge and prevention. These are messages focused on COVID awareness for children and caregivers. Caregivers and child well-being, and these are messages focused on the importance of well-being and stress management. And ECD awareness and raising messages. These are messages focused on the importance of play for children and how it's contributing to the development of cognitive and emotional skills. And then activities-based programming. These are messages guide caregivers through simple at-home ECD activities focused on language, social, emotional, cognitive, and motor physical health domains, and are linked to the Ahlan Simpson TV show. Slide. If you click the slide one more time, I hope the video will, so the video will play while I talk. So this is a simple activity sent to caregiver focused on well-being, which emphasizes on the importance of stress management. It's a simple message drawing on the mindfulness strategy like belly breathing that caregivers can use themselves and teach their children. I won't go through much details of the activity of the video, but as you can see in front of you, it's a message that we can send to caregivers that guide them through the activity. But I'm happy to provide links to Ahlan Simpson videos and Ahlan Simpson website in the chat box after I finish the presentation. Slide. The team tested messages and delivery with 200 caregivers across the region, where we involved and listened to refugees, IDPs, and host communities, and further adapted based on their feedback. Most feedback was about the importance of localizing the messages and activities. Messages sent with local language and accent resonated more with caregivers. The other message was simple activities along with illustration videos to improve children and caregivers' experience. There was a request of activities to focus on movement and physical activities for caregiver well-being, psychosocial support, stress management, and daily routine. The last finding was the strategies and tactics that increases two-way communication with caregivers and increase interaction with each group. In Iraq, for example, the team in Mosul decided after 2 cycles of the program to create smaller groups of only 5 parents and instead of bigger groups of 15 to 20 parents to allow for conversation to take place and for parents to be more engaged. This increased engagement by almost 30%. Than doing in bigger WhatsApp groups. We are constantly learning and testing different methods of delivery and messages to ensure we are reaching as many vulnerable children and caregivers as possible during these very challenging times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayman. I'd like to turn now to our colleague Luz Artundwaga in UNICEF Colombia. Please go ahead.
Luz, if you can unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry. Okay, hello everybody. Thanks the organizer for this webinar and for inviting us to participate and share the experience of UNICEF Colombia's ECD in humanitarian context. We call migration COVID the path run in early childhood, from friendly spaces to friendly line. The next, please. Colombia, in a middle-income country with economic and social inequalities, is going through a complex humanitarian crisis, where various situations are mixed. Some generated by environmental conditions such as rains and droughts, other by displacement generated by unresolved situation of violence, Another more recent one, like the exacerbation of the mixed migratory flow with Venezuela, and the one closest to all of us, the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet, we know that the knock-on impact for children is huge and risks a devastating lifelong impact on the poorest and most vulnerable. Today, Colombia has 1,800,000 Venezuelan migrants regular. One of these more 1,025,000 are regular. Approximately 10% are children. And the last dates by June 9, the COVID-19 figures are 42,078 cases. Of these, 4.5% of children under 10. The total of death is 372. Next, please. Humanitarian response in this context, in this migratory flow, has been directed to the general population. And early childhood has been absent of proposal. The friendly spaces are created, where the child or his family are received, contain a methodologic route from the pedagogic of community, family, and individual approach to the prevention of alteration in early childhood development, promotion the four spheres of development through play, art, and communication, according to his needs. If necessary, they refer to other care, such as health. Group activities are carried out between families and children, offer a snack, and given a development kit to reinforce action at home. With adults, activities are carried out to deal with the toxic stress with which they arrive. At this point, it is highlighted that emotionally, Venezuela boys and girls have been affected by the strong, unexpected changes to which they are exposed. Many parents are disoriented when they want to help their children face the migratory grief that they are going through. During 2019, 11 spaces were created with attending of 85,700 children under 5 and 112,600 fathers, mothers, and caregivers. 92% Venezuelans. The achievement has been the improvement of the parent response to the children in transitional environments appropriate to their needs and from the attention. Next, please. With the emergency of COVID, it was necessary to adjust the how. The focus is the same, promoting the early childhood development and social-emotional support family through the child-friendly lines. It started with 6, and now, after 2.5 months, there are 22 lines, approximately 3,300 families, 75 Venezuelans and 25 Colombian, and 6,322 children under 5. The stability of the family in this line are 100%. Communicated, it is maintaining with them, and it has become so vital that families request income daily. There are contact with families in various states of Venezuela, in Ecuador, and in various departments of the country. The line went from having a small territorial attention and now across borders. Some characteristics in the evolution of the friendliest lines of early childhood from the point of view of the caregivers, the families, and the point of view the family that receive it, and according to the time of implementation. A first reaction of despair, skepticism, a second of expectation, and a third of participation, initiative, and hope. Some reflection, the next please, some reflection of this experience, the values of respect, collaboration, and enjoyment. Strengthen the symbolic a space of the home, given by the affection and the interaction of the space, not as something physical, but a product of affection and interrelations. The friendlies concept, which implies bidirectional communication, participation, generating links and responding to needs. It has been built along the way where creativity, color, and joy have prevailed. And this is the product of the interrelation between the culture of the Venezuelan, Caribbean, and the social professional who cares from them, commitment, dedication, personality. Alleged initiative and creativity is necessary to continue, reinforce, to promote, and it can be replicated. Caregiver care activities are reinforced. And the last one, lesson learned are a fundamental element is to promote creativity as a gateway to feeling of well-being. A necessary restitution to promote development, it is to encourage the creativity and the joy. Creativity environments with joy and well-being break the daily life that migration generates, alleviating the burden of frustration involved. Creativity environments promote and facilitate broad participation of both beneficiaries and agents who promote it. The last one, only to say thanks. And finally, UNICEF Colombia has two evaluations in progress. One, the evaluation of the friendly space, and second, an alliance with the IDB to strengthen early childhood development in children of migrant families walking from Venezuela. In both development, cost-effective, scalable, and adaptable models to different migration profiles and conditions, and initiative to development of public policy hand in hand with different actors to ensure sustainable opportunities and investment. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Luz. Very, very nice. And just to thank all of the panelists, we still have more to go, and it's time for me to hand over. But just to mention my thanks, and also how impressed I am with the creativity and the dedication that I'm hearing about now in response to the crisis that all of us are facing. Just a reminder to ask any questions or place any comments in the chat box. I'm now happy to hand over to Elvira from the Moving Minds Alliance and Bernard Van Leer Foundation, who will moderate the next section of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, we're gonna now briefly move away from focus on programs on the ground and dive into two other key topics, no less interesting. The first topic here is the importance really of generating evidence to inform current and future programming. And then after that, we'll have a look at the need for continued and increased investment in all aspects of early childhood development support in the COVID context and beyond. So on the first topic, we have Hiro Yoshikawa joining us. He is co-director at the Global Ties for Children Research Center at New York University. And I had to look up Hiro what TIES stands for, but I found it again. It stands for Transforming Intervention Effectiveness and Scale. So over to you, Hiro.
Sure, great. Could the slides be put up? I'm going to try to keep this to 2 minutes rather than the 5 minutes. Great. So I'm going to talk briefly about the importance of descriptive implementation and evaluation research. Next slide, please. And I do acknowledge Partner Sesame Workshop, International Rescue Committee, and BRAC in our current work. I'm going to not actually go over this list, but just to say that there are a variety of current data collection efforts going on, many of them phone-based, in order to understand the current experiences of young children and their families. And here I would only mention that there is a wide range of risks, but there are also very important protective and promoted factors that could be acknowledged for individual and community resilience. Next slide, please. So I'm going to concentrate on the questions for evidence generation implementation on the one hand, and then impact evaluation on the other. First, that there are emerging and really important and disturbing reports of particular ways that the virus SARS-CoV-2 and the illness COVID-19 appear in children, including young children. And so we are at the beginning of understanding what health effects and the pathogenesis of this disease are in young children. So we should not leave out the direct health effects on young children. Of course, we are interested in how response platforms, health, nutrition, psychosocial support, social protection, child protection, and education may work in situations where one or more of them are shut down partially or completely in terms of services. And so I think the notion of task shifting and the flexibility that the various very inspiring intervention models presented today have a lot of relevance for our notions in ECD of intersectoral, sectoral, and multisectoral work. How are business as usual ECD services affected in this? There's an urgent need to understand the quality measurement of new modalities, whether they are phone-based or hybrids of phone, radio, TV, and any aspects that are actually interactive, including video-based interventions, illustrations, those kinds of things. Another key aspect in implementation is the well-being of ECD providers and facilitators. Some anecdotal evidence from India suggests that there can be burnout even in this remote teleplatform work. And any of us who have been on Zoom calls back to back for hours can understand how remote telecounseling may be wearing on providers. And we do have a history of support for that in crisis intervention. A systems perspective on supports and governance is of course extremely important, as these are new challenges for systems. Next slide, please. So turning to impact evaluations, we do need to know what are the impacts on children of interruptions in business as usual ECD services. What are the impacts on demand for things like in-person services, modalities like home visiting that really rely on that person-to-person contact and someone actually entering a home. Group-based interventions, community-based modalities, and of course, early care and education systems for implementation of social protection, going beyond food parcels and food distribution to new approaches to cash transfers that are integrated with ECD programs. Many of these new modalities have been mentioned. They include phone-based WhatsApp or app interventions, peer support that's facilitated online or on phones, telecounseling approaches, radio and TV broadcasts, and I think the future of ECD, which for at least the course of this epidemic will be a mix of hybrid interventions that change over time as well as at any one point in time. With the experience of youth and with interruptions in their own schooling, there's a tremendous opportunity for youth to get engaged in community-based ECD programs, and we need to understand the impacts on youth and communities, not just on young children and their families, of such interventions. And finally, re-emphasizing that systems and sectoral and multi-sectoral processes, we need to understand the impact of these innovations on the systems and the context of the systems affecting program effectiveness on the ground. My last slide I'm actually not going to go over, but there are implications for methods. So I believe these slides will be distributed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hero, and thank you for staying within time perfectly. I'd like to hand over to Michael Simpson, who is the ECD expert at TheirWorld, the children's charity fighting for education for all and a wonderful advocate for the early years. Michael, over to you.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm just trying to start the video, but I feel like the host, it says I need to get the host's permission. So there we are. Perfect. Thank you. Right. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. There we are. So TheirWorld is, as Elvira just said, a campaigning organization that's education focused. A lot of our emphasis is on early childhood education and development. Hold on. There we are. Okay, so I'm going to do a presentation really focused on the advocacy opportunities that COVID-19 is opening up. Mindful that as much as the hardships that many of the presenters have talked about just now, the moments of crisis do present new opportunities, and often these opportunities are found in pre-existing ideas. So the crisis effectively presents new opportunities to amplify them, and I guess no bigger example can be the racism sort of protests that are occurring across the world at the moment. But with the very real and frightening prospect of a lost generation of young children, now more than ever, we need to see real, tangible financial commitment from donors to fund early child education. This is how we build back better, the sort of mantra that's sort of defining a lot of the chatter in the international development world at the moment. And so this is why TheirWorld is calling on donors and governments to commit 10% of their education spending on early childhood education. Last year, UNICEF made this 10% commitment. And with the Global Partnership for Education, a major global education funder, drawing up a new multi-year strategy, we're calling on them, likewise, to make the same commitment, and are currently running a campaign targeting board members to adopt a 10% ambition. So this is an example of strategic advocacy that really sort of speaks to the moment, and we hope that everyone here can get involved as well. So prior to COVID-19, and I have to sort of emphasize that the numbers have radically shifted since, and it's something that we need to be mindful of when we're talking about this kind of data, 175 million children were denied access to early childhood education. In crisis-affected countries like Somalia, Chad, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, fewer than 2% of the poorest children there attend pre-primary. So this is a major, major gap in education provision. GPE is a major funder of education in emergency initiatives. For example, in December, the board set out a new accelerated fund, unlocking $250 million emergency funding, $250 million of emergency funding for 2020. And this is Julie Gillard, the chair's sort of comments on why that was important. So by committing 10% of its funding to early childhood education, GPE has an enormous opportunity to unlock early childhood education for over 1 million children. So our 10% ask is evidence informed, and is the absolute minimum world leaders need to commit to if we have any hope of fulfilling the promise that was set out in the Sustainable Development Goals to leave no one behind. By 2030, the Education Commission, and again, these are pre-crisis figures, so we need to sort of maybe update these going forward, but just mindful of that. The Education Commission calculated that the total cost of pre-primary education is projected to be 10 billion in low-income countries and 68 billion in lower-income countries. So with all levels of education anticipated to total around $580 billion in those contexts, pre-primary education will comprise 13.4% of the total. So a 10% ask is the bare minimum that world leaders need to be doing. But even before COVID-19, the funding picture for early childhood education was fairly bleak. Global investment from donors to early childhood education in 2017 was just $68.8 million, or 0.5% of overall aid to education. That's a tiny, tiny figure in proportion to the rest of education spending, so it's not a zero-sum game. This picture has got significantly worse with COVID-19 wreaking havoc on lots of economies around the world, in all parts of the world. So the World Bank projects that the average government expenditure in low-income countries will fall from 14% to 2.5% by the start of 2021. It's currently believed to be around 0% at the moment. So this is in the midst of the crisis, but even as we emerge from the sort of worst case situations that we're currently facing, education spending is only going to go up to 2.5%. So that already governments across sub-Saharan Africa on average only allocate less than 3% of education spending on early childhood education. So we're going to see big extreme new pressures on this sort of tranche of education, meaning that many, many children will be left out. So as it stands, the paucity of existing provision for tens of millions of children across the world means that there is little to build back from. But by 2030, with a commitment, with GPE leading this kind of commitment by committing to 10%, we can ensure that at least 9/10 of the world's children have access to 2 years of high quality pre-primary education. This is going to take firm financial commitment. So if you want to support this campaign, people can take action to support our GPE by emailing or tweeting board members, and I'll share the link for you to do that. And basically urging board members to commit to the 10% ask as they draw up their new strategy. So far, people from across from 70 countries across the world have already taken action, and their support has helped secure commitments from the Ministers of Education in South Sudan and Kenya, who both sit on the board. So there is a real sort of drive within GPE to kind of make this commitment, and we just need to sort of see that commitment well, fully met by the other members of the board as well as they kind of drop their strategy. So I can share all of this in the chat box now. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you, Hero, for helping us to look beyond to today and the experience of today, and what we're experiencing might make possible in the future, either for program adaptations and also needs in terms of continued investment for all aspects of early childhood development. I think we're moving into Q&A, so I'm handing over now to Shikufe.
Thank you, everyone. And I would just request if all the panelists could now turn on their video so that we can move into the Q&A portion. There have been some great questions. I do encourage everyone to look at the Q&A chat box, and under answered, you'll see a lot of the panelists have been busy responding to all your questions in the answered section as well. But we will move into the chat box. What I will be doing is I will invite our participants to ask their questions live. So just be aware of that if I call your name, and I will be inviting you to answer your questions live. But just to begin, thank you everyone for your great conversations. One of the questions that came up repeatedly was, I know there was a lot of talk of using hybrid and online platforms to reach families and so on, but Mercy Mulanga, she's asking about the limited mobility of aid workers and views of changing program strategies, especially in camps. And in the answered portion, some of you shared some great examples, and I think it would be great to bring that to the forefront. But how are you dealing with limited mobility in your programs? If we can get a couple responses on that.
Well, I can start. For us, it was simple. So it was this smooth transition over to our refugee teachers, cooks, education coordinators, to go from that type of work to become frontline public health workers. Because from the beginning of the programs, from the co-creation part, they are leading the programs themselves. So we don't have any staff there, you know, supervising. They don't need supervisors. They know how to supervise themselves. It's us communicating with them through WhatsApp and giving them support, answering their questions. And then from there, they go visit the families directly. Yeah, being safely, you know, doing it safely, following all the health protocols. But then they communicate with the families, check in with them, give them suggestions on activities to do with their children, and number one, how to stay safe.
Thank you, Gabriel. Anybody else want to respond to that question? Sarlash?
Sure. So similar to what IACT is doing, we've tried to keep in communication with the communities that we serve through WhatsApp and Facebook, and but we really focused our resources and supporting the local organizations that we partner with in Greece. A big part of our approach is working with Greek organizations, the grassroots organizations that are working really hard to support the refugee community. So we've been working with them to help them to continue their work and to also to support them emotionally. This has been a really difficult time for frontline workers. So we are trying to do as much as we can to support the delivery. And I think my colleague and I have shared our website. We've produced resources in different languages to be shared with families, with young people, and with practitioners to help alleviate some of the emotional impact of being in lockdown. So I would encourage everyone to go and have a look at those.
Thanks, Arlash, and thank you for raising the importance of the mental health of the service providers, because there's been a lot of questions about the psychosocial support given to children and their families, but I think that's a really good point, and I'm just wondering if we can hear from other organizations about their experience with the psychosocial impact of the frontline workers themselves. Any insights on that front? Aram.
Yeah, I'd like to say, I think that, you know, it's very, very important also to look at the well-being of frontline workers. And, you know, for the frontline workers, what we've done is, you know, we have essentially 3 different platforms, and we've tried to integrate that. And, you know, that's because one is what we do is, you know, through the training, like I said, through the training, we try to look at the same kind of principles as, you know, how do we heal, how do we engage in a conversation, and you know, we talk about empathy and listening, etc. So that's one. Second is, you know, we have a hotline, and any of the frontline workers can call, and you know, there we have trained counselors who would be taking those calls. And the third is that, you know, any moment that any frontliner is suspected or, you know, is infected with COVID, that comes under a completely different therapeutic protocol. So we've looked at these 3 different kind of platforms, and you know, we support the frontliners through these different platforms, all aimed at counseling and therapeutic well-being.
Thank you. That was very insightful. I want to invite, you know, since we have been talking about this issue, I think Amy Vachon raises a really interesting question. Amy, would you like to ask your question briefly live? Just introduce yourself and where you're from. Amy Vachon, yep.
Sure. Hi. Hi, I'm Amy. I'm from Plan International Bangladesh. I'm the co-chair of the ECD working group here. Thanks, Aram, for your excellent presentation on the work that's been going on here. My question is that there's been a huge emphasis on tech-based ECD solutions in this presentation, which is excellent, but I'm wondering if there has been any advocacy planned for the importance of access to physical learning materials for young children, especially for those of us working in refugee camps where access to those learning materials for families is quite limited.
Thank you, Amy. Can we hear from our panelists? Anyone with a response to that question? An important one.
I can say something about that. I think what you raise, Amy, is really, really important. I think families do need to have access to, you know, to physical material, and we've tried to do that with the communities that we serve. But given the fact that there is very limited resources available, we've tried to make our activities that we send to families really simple, and so that the mothers and the fathers that are doing these activities can do that with what's available to them, either in the camp or in the household. I think one of the ECD offers such a creative opportunity for families to do activities with young children using things that are, you know, available around them. So that's what we've really tried to focus on, to create activities that don't require any resources.
Thanks, Arlash. Any other responses to that question?
Yeah, if I can add something very quickly. We are in the process of distributing some paper-based packages to families who work we can't access through WhatsApp or through digital means. So we are engaging with some of our local partners on the ground who have access to refugee and IDP camps during these times of health restrictions, and integrating some of early childhood development messages, COVID-19 awareness messages, and some simple activities that can be printed and delivered to families at their homes that can be done at home, and activities that don't require a lot of internet connection, digital skills to do.
And just to take us to close on this whole discussion on the technology piece, I want to invite Aranzao Alonso to introduce yourself briefly and ask the question you have, that a few other participants also had the same question. So Aranzao, if you can briefly introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, yes, my name is Aranzazu Alonso. I coordinate a network that is called Pacto por la Primera Infancia. We do a lot of advocacy to prioritize early childhood development in Mexico as a country. We have seen a lot of trouble here in Mexico to reach families that has no resources at all. So WhatsApp not always is the best way because families don't have the money to pay for airtime. So WhatsApp requires a minimum investment. And some of these families have not access to this kind of digital support. What can we do to help those families that has no access to digital platforms or resources to pay for airtime like WhatsApp? Thank you.
Thank you for that important question. Over to you, panelists. Any experience or responses to that?
Yeah, for us, it's very similar. Most of the families do not have access to WhatsApp in the camps that we work in. So we depend on the leaders themselves. So the teachers, again, the cooks, the coordinators. We are in constant contact with them, and we're constantly sending them funding for WhatsApp for those leaders. And then they are the ones that go to the families and check in with the families and provide either written information and many times verbal, because literacy in some of the families is not there for the parents. So they have to actually verbally, share about the activities. And same as others have said, it has to be simple activities. There's just not enough resources to take around to all the different families. It's encouraging storytelling, a lot of the things that they already do in their families, and just a lot of speaking with their kids and offering opportunities for play. Another important thing, another aspect that is very important for these communities and for the leaders is that for us, we have one large WhatsApp group. So our leaders from Chad are communicating with leaders in Cameroon, in Tanzania, in Greece. And it's just so beautiful to see the support among themselves and learning from each other. And then just know that others are in the same, that they are going through the same thing. The emotional toll on them feeling isolated and now even more isolated is huge. So just to feel that connection among themselves and knowing that they are together, that gets from them shared to the rest of the camps.
Thanks, Gabriel. Any other insights?
Yes, I would like to say something about the last question, that is especially in rural, and we have in Colombia the same situation, and especially in rural areas, families do not have connectivity, and we are using the community radio network, and they are working very, very well. And soon we will be using TV with clear messages from families. I think that this kind of to put the things in families, it's a good way. And would like to say another thing about the important, the emotion. One very important thing that must be strengthened in all care is care of the caregiver. 1 hour session, at least twice a week, this has generated a lot of tranquility and security of caregivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Luz. Please keep your video on so that we see that we can see you and you can respond to questions. And Luz, I just want to pick up on it. No, keep your video on, Luz, so that you're present if you can. But I just want to invite Juan Giraldo Huertas to ask an important question, because we've been hearing the adaptations that you've been making, and you've been sharing that you've had good responses. But Juan Giraldo Huertas asks an important question. So I just want to invite you, Juan, to ask your question. And please introduce yourself briefly, where you're from. Juan? Is he there? Oh. Okay, well, I will ask his question on his behalf. So Juan Giraldo Huertas asks, how are you measuring these results? Is it observation or intuition? So, you know, how do we know that these methods are working? How do we claim that they are? And there have been a few questions about that. I see, Juan, you're on there if you want to add anything more to the question. Juan?
Oh, hi. No, thanks. It's just related with that, with the measurement and how feasible and how you get that for a long way to understand and have changes with clear units of measurement to our impact. So how can we find an impact with doing all that with communities and of course families and children in vulnerable conditions?
Juan, can you tell us where you're calling from? Juan? Okay. All right. Okay, over to you, panelists, about how are we learning that these new methods, hybrid methods, are indeed effective on the things that we care about in terms of early childhood development. So I turn it over to you. Yes. Please go ahead.
I just want to say, I mean, I think that, you know, we are also looking at it, you know, from the perspective that, you know, we've done it as an emergency response, and obviously, you know, this will evolve. So one of the things, I mean, we've tried a few things, but one of the things is that, you know, what we've done is with the permission of the caregivers that we speak to, as well as, you know, of the different participants, with the permission, we've recorded these, because, you know, I think the first thing is that we must be able to understand what is the quality of the teleconversation. And so in order to be able to really understand the quality, we're trying to record and trying to really understand the quality of that. So that's one. And the second is also what we do is, you know, every month we also have the, you know, the trainings, and which are also mobile to mobile. So when we have the trainings, we're also trying to understand, you know, at the different tiers as to, you know, what has happened. I mean, you know, what is their own experience? You know, how did they feel going through this training, or how do they feel, you know, talking about this? So I think what I'll say is that, you know, really at the absolute very basic level, trying to understand the quality of the teleconversation itself, and also trying to understand that, you know, what is the experience of the people who go through it. And then, you know, we will have to also see as it evolves, trying to look at more measures. But we are at a very basic level, and trying to have this understanding is very important.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Any other thoughts on measurement and pivoting to measure both the effectiveness of the intervention and how it's an impact on children's development at this stage? Zarlash?
Sure. I think, like Iram said, what we tried to do was an emergency response, and I think I don't imagine anyone has very robust measurement tools right now for how to measure the impact of what we're doing. We're looking at lots of digital ways of, you know, how many people are engaging with things that we're posting online, views on videos, things like that, and also what feedback we're getting from the families themselves. So what are they saying about the resources that we're sending? I just wanted to add one quick thing for the question before, because the digital approach to what we're doing is not going to work if there's no connectivity. So I think that's a really key issue. And as far as I understand, and I'm not a COVID expert by any means, but we're going to go in and out of lockdown for a long time to come. And so I think we really need to, as a community, work out how we're going to address that issue. A lot of really vulnerable families are in these, you know, places where there's no connectivity, or they don't have the resources to buy. So the risk is that lots of vulnerable people are going to be completely disconnected from organizations that support them. So we really need to work out how we're going to bring that connectivity to communities in Greece, to Chad, all these different places, because otherwise they're just gonna appear and disappear. And I don't think that, you know, evaluation is going to be a key issue in that instance.
Thank you, Zarlash, for those very important insights. Hira, I'm wondering if you have anything to share on the measurement front?
Sure. The first thing I would say is that in different contexts, I think data collection has been used for needs assessment, right? So because this has been unprecedented and the mix of basic needs and well-being needs and I think nurturing care kinds of needs are different in different locations within countries. Even among displaced and refugee populations and migrant populations. So that has been used. You don't have to cover the entire population. Getting a sample is fine. And qualitative, it can be just as important as quantitative, if not more so, in understanding the needs and strengths of populations. And so that basic principle has been put into action in various contexts. And in addition to, I think, some of the digital approaches that the systems themselves can tell you about engagement, phone-based surveys have proven quite successful in some surprising contexts, including with refugee populations in our experience. And that may be partially a side product of these kinds of lockdown situations. So that has been possible to do. And then I think platforms like WhatsApp may be possible to kind of supplement with very brief survey. I mean, these are not the kinds of surveys that most of us researchers do, but much, much shorter surveys to try to understand what the impact is.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this?
From me, I agree with what's been said, that it's just so important to not get not let things get in the way of real action on the ground. We heard from one refugee leader that if they had 2 bikes, they could reach 6 times the amount of people that they were reaching. We didn't ask for, go check out prices and send us, 5 estimates and let's look at the budget. We just sent them money for bikes. 2 days later, they had reached 6 times the people that they were reaching daily. And we know what works, so we just have to trust them at this point on the ground, and then we can on the go start moving, and any interventions and any data collection especially at this point should be useful. The process itself should be useful for them. So it shouldn't be just what we want to learn, what we want to know, what we need to show the funders. It should be what's going to help them from the process itself.
Thanks, Gabrielle. That was really insightful. In the last few minutes we have left, I do have a couple other questions that I do want to get through. And this is about what we're observing in this context regarding very specific populations. So we had a whole series of questions about children with disabilities, and I'm wondering if the panelists can share. So one of the questions was, what are the particular needs that you're observing that are emerging specifically on children with disabilities? And, given that they're traditionally underserved and unnoticed, how are you responding to the gap, if at all? And what are you observing throughout your own contexts and projects? So if we can have a rapid round of responses on that. Luz, do you want to respond to that? No. Okay. Anybody else on the disability question? How are we addressing the needs of this very specific population? Okay.
All I can say maybe around reopening is that I've heard of some innovations where in some countries there is a limited reopening in education systems that prioritizes children with disabilities. And I think that's a very interesting idea, because this is a subgroup of the population. And if we want to start understanding how education spaces can be utilized, that is one approach, is to potentially start with children with special needs, in part because perhaps their learning has been the most interrupted in the conditions of the pandemic.
Thanks, Hira, for that. Any other thoughts on this? Katie?
I can just add briefly, I think it's an excellent point. Children with disabilities are largely neglected even before the global pandemic, and it's something that I think our community really needs to focus on and do much better in terms of ensuring that all services are inclusive and that we're supporting caregivers and connecting children with services where possible. One interesting approach we've had is really sort of trying to empower the caregivers with a better understanding of children's developmental milestones, of ways that they can adapt their own behaviors and build the capacities of both the caregivers and the child for specific developmental needs. And we've worked with some great consultants, and we have a great disability advisor on our own team who's been really helpful in thinking that through. I think in terms of the impact on children with disabilities, that's something that we really hope to learn more about from the research and understand how that particular population may be affected differently than other children. So thanks.
Thanks, Katie. I just want to draw our attention to a really sweet comment in the chat box from Madiha that says, can I just say my toddler is looking over my shoulder and excited to see Elmo and Grover on the screen. So that's great. That's really lovely. Thanks for sharing that, Madiha. Very lovely. In the last couple of minutes, I want to invite Rupjyoti Konwar to ask your question, because now he's also asking about another very specific population. So Rupjyoti, if you can share where you're calling from and your question very briefly.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Am I audible?
Yes,
okay.
you are.
Actually, I'm from India. Yeah, I'm from India. So we are also facing issues like reverse migration. The laborers are going back to their homes, and they're losing their jobs, and the parents are migrating. So children are obviously, girls' education, girls are suffering, ECD is suffering. So, and they're the sufferers. So, like sometimes I felt like guilty from being privileged. Obviously, it happened. So while approaching, it is like it's a kind of dilemma to how to approach them that so that they don't get hurt, because during this time we are not approaching physically, but only technology, which is not so many a times connected, I feel. So that is something I would like to know, how people are connecting to people, those who are suffering, like in a very effective manner, that they don't get hurt. Something like this is my thought, actually. Yes.
Thanks, Rupjyoti. I also want to add the part of your question that really I wanted the panelists to also address, in addition to that, was where you had asked about reverse migration issues and laborers migrating from home to village and different states. It's similar challenges to refugees in other countries. And I think that's an important point, because we're seeing a huge trend of, urban reverse migration from urban to rural areas. So I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts and reflection on that, where we can see similar to.
Because for that, we need a larger framework of policy modification, like like a larger that scale. NGOs.
All right, over to the panelists
but
to respond. Thank you, Rupjyoti. Yeah, panelists, any thoughts on that question?
I mean, I think. Sorry, I think that one of the things, like, Jyoti is saying that, top line, we do see that, there's going to be reverse migration, but, there's also sort of, we do also find that, with the adult population, with caregivers, I mean, there's going to be all these issues of kind of poverty increasing. And, there's, food consumption, really decreasing. So, in Bangladesh, like, it's estimated from 24%, it's going to be 35%. So it's a 9% increase in poverty. And a recent survey found that people are eating like, 25% less is food consumptions. And so, I think that, what Jyoti is saying is, in terms of reverse migration, but also like within the whole garment population in Bangladesh, I mean, there's going to be, some are going to be employed and some are not. And then we also have a lot of people, migrants coming over, returning to Bangladesh because of, jobs, losing out on jobs. So I think we are looking at a kind of a, sort of situation where a lot of the adult population will be sort of losing jobs, going back to the village, and there's a sort of real drop in their family income, real drop in family food consumptions. And these are the kind of top line patterns that we are already expecting. And this will also implicate that, you have a large number of children who will be going back to work.
Right. Thank you for that, Irmapa. Very complex issues. Any other panelists have a last thought on this question? I know there are so many more questions about training, about reopening post-COVID, about joint advocacy, about how we can do this. And so this just means this is, a beginning or a continuation of a dialogue that we all need to continue to have. At this time, I'd like to invite again, representatives from each of the networks to thank everyone. We are right at time. There will be a recording of this available and sent to you, including links to all the presentations and the resources that you have requested. So a quick round of thanks from each of the networks, and thank you to all the participants for helping shape a rich conversation, and thank you to the panelists for helping us with that as well. So really quickly, let's hear from Dean.
Great, no, just thank you to everyone and all the hard work that folks might not realize that went into developing this. Shakufa, Katie, Nada, everyone, thank you so much. We look forward to following up and sharing the recording of this on the INEE website. But again, thank you.
Thank you, Elvira.
Yes, thanks to everyone. Thanks for joining and for making the time in this era of Zoom fatigue, as Hiro mentioned. Likewise, you said at Shakufa, I hope this is the beginning of an ongoing dialogue, which would be a great silver lining of COVID-19, and look forward to working as Moving Minds Alliance with our partners at INEE, ACDAN, and beyond to keep us connected.
Thank you so much. And finally, Elizabeth.
Wow, what a great global conversation. I always feel so excited to see all the sharing that goes on through the chat box, the questions, and really to see the exchange of ideas. It makes me feel hopeful that we can do better for these disadvantaged children. And one key takeaway is, let's not forget that the parents and the children can be part of the solution, and we need to listen to their voices as well, as much as we do everything for them. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you for the opportunity to collaborate and for the excellent presentations from the panelists. A million thanks, and please stay safe and healthy. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.